Hey guys, as part of my year of rereading for 2021, I'm going to be talking about Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister by Gregory Maguire. Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister by Gregory Maguire is set in Holland during the 17th century and follows Iris, who is newly arrived in Holland with her ambitious mother and mentally handicapped sister. The trio find themselves in a world of wealth and artifice, where the strong survive and the weak perish. Their lives become intertwined with that of Clara, one of the most beautiful and desired girls in town, who is destined to inspire the story of Cinderella. So, as I mentioned at the top of this video, Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister by Gregory Maguire is part of my year of rereading for 2021, and pretty much like every single book that I have been rereading this year, this is once again another book that it's definitely been a good decade since I last read it. So I was pretty excited to reread this book, re-experience it, see if I was going to kind of feel the same way about this book like I did, a decade ago when I last read it, pretty much. And yeah, I'm glad to say I still really enjoyed this book. If anything, I almost feel like I found perhaps a greater appreciation for this book. This book isn't perfect. It's definitely not perfect. There's definitely plenty of reviews on Goodreads, people who just do not really like this book, and this book just does not gel with them, and I can totally understand why. This book is definitely a slower read in some ways, and that's going to either be your cup of tea or it's not, and in some ways there's not really a heck of a lot actually going on in this book. This book is definitely what I would term as like literary. Definitely more of like a literary book that's really strongly focused on like imagery and thematic messages and stuff like that, if that makes sense. So yeah, this book isn't going to be for everybody, but like I said, I did still enjoy my reread of this book, and as I mentioned as well, I think I actually had a better appreciation for it, because I think I picked up on certain things going on in this book quicker and easier than I did a decade ago. I think certain plot points, certain thematic messages, imagery and whatnot, I think a lot of stuff made a lot more sense to me now. Like, I was able to kind of comprehend it and be like, oh, okay. It's kind of one of those situations upon my reread. So yeah, let's get into my actual thoughts and feelings about this book, whether or not it's going to be something you would enjoy as well. This is definitely a very different take on a retelling for Cinderella. It's very, very different and unusual and kind of bizarre almost in some ways. And that's kind of a good thing, I think. I think it's a good thing how different this book is. Because a lot of times I think when you read a retelling, you're expecting a retelling to be a certain way, and to follow that retelling from step A, B, C, D, E, F, G, however, and the thing is, Gregory Maguire, though he is retelling the story of Cinderella, he is taking his own unique twist on it, his own unique spin, and he's just doing his own thing with it, which is great and refreshing. And really, a lot of the very familiar elements that you typically see in a Cinderella retelling, a lot of those very familiar threads don't even really appear in full until perhaps maybe the last 25% of this novel. Now, that's not to say there's not threads that kind of interweaved throughout the beginning and the middle. There is definitely some of those Cinderella threads there, if you know where to look. Gregory Maguire, I don't think he's like, to me anyway, I don't think he's like totally like in your face about something. Sometimes you got to read into something in particular, to kind of be like, okay, this is where he's retelling this particular thread from Cinderella, how he's incorporating this particular thread from that familiar story and whatnot. Like I said, Gregory Maguire, he takes his own unique spin, takes his own sweet time telling this story. And yeah, if you're familiar with his Wicked series, especially the very first book, Wicked, which was about, it was his retelling of the Wicked Witch of the West from Wizard of Oz. If you've read Wicked or that entire series, he definitely takes his own unique sneaks in on the Wizard of Oz stories and does his own thing and doesn't give a damn what anybody says or thinks. And that's kind of how he goes with this book as well. Like, I'm going to do my own thing because this is the story I want to tell. These are the messages I want to incorporate. And yeah, a lot of times I feel like Gregory Maguire, when he's retelling a story, because that seems to kind of be his thing, a lot of his books tend to be retellings of some sort. A lot of times, Gregory Maguire, he has some sort of thematic message or imagery that he wants to present with the book, and the best way for him to do that is him using and incorporating a fairy tale, you know, and retelling it in his own way to kind of dive into the issues and commentary that he wants to delve into, if that makes sense. So, getting further into what this book is about, and kind of branching out a little bit more from the synopsis I gave you guys, as I mentioned in my brief synopsis, this book is set in 17th century Holland. We follow a young girl named Iris. She and her older sister, who is a bit mentally handicapped, and her very, very ambitious mother, they are arriving in Holland. They are newly arrived. You quickly discover at the top of this narrative that they are fleeing England for some particular reason, something involving a scandal involving their father and whatnot. So they are on the run. They are arriving in Holland with the hopes of boarding with a wealthy, well-connected relative that's living in Holland, but lo and behold, they discovered that this wealthy, well-connected relative, he's been dead for a little while, and they didn't know that. So here they are in Holland, stuck in a foreign place. They don't really know the language that well. Well, I guess they do, because their backstory, they are like half Dutch, half English, something like that. So they do kind of know some of the language. But yeah, here they are still in a foreign place around people they don't know, a situation that they're not sure how to get out of, and just people turning their backs against them, pretty much. No one offering up any sort of charity to help these three women in need. But then they do run into a man who is known as the Master. He is a local artist, a local painter, and he has a young apprentice named Caspar, who Iris immediately takes a fancy to. And yeah, Caspar and the Master, they show some charity to these three women in need and take them in, and like Iris's mother essentially becomes like household help for this artist and whatnot. And yeah, through a series of events, the Master, he is tasked with painting the town beauty named Clara. Clara is a young girl. She's very reclusive, but she's known for her beauty and whatnot. So the Master paints this very beautiful portrait of her that becomes like the talk of the town, essentially, and everyone wants to see this painting to get a glimpse of this beautiful girl, you know. And then yeah, this is also how Iris and her mother and her sister, how they also, their lives intertwine with this young girl, Clara, and her family and whatnot. And then this is how you start getting into the Cinderella story, because then once again, through a series of events, Iris, her mother eventually does marry Clara's father in this book, fairly early in the book, eventually gets married. That's how Clara and Iris and her sister, they all become stepsisters and whatnot. And you do, eventually, by the time you reach into this book, you do get some of those very classical threads of the Cinderella story. You know, why are these stepsisters, why are they considered the ugly stepsisters? How does this girl become known as Cinderella? How does she kind of become the household help, almost? Yeah, we do get a ball eventually, you know, someone wealthy comes to town, there's a ball. We eventually get like the slipper, the missing slipper, you know. All of those familiar threads eventually wind up in here in Gregory Maguire's own unique little take. And yeah, you might be expecting this book to deal with like magic, you know, because the original story, you have like a fairy godmother, and you have a pumpkin being turned into a coach, and mice being turned into coachmen, you know. This book has nothing to do with magic. Let's kind of put that out there. I almost feel like some people go into this book expecting it to have like, you know, a classical fairy tale sort of thing with magic and, you know, whimsy and fun and whatnot. Yeah, there's absolutely no magic in this. There's no like fairy godmother, you know, nothing like that. This book is a lot more darker. It's a lot more serious. It's definitely pondering heavier issues and whatnot. And touching on some of the thematic themes, imagery of this book, Gregory Maguire's particular theme in this book is very heavily focused on the nature of beauty and the nature of ugliness. This whole book is questioning what is beauty, what is ugliness, you know, why is something considered ugly, why is something considered beautiful. It has a lot to do with like how someone sees themselves, you know, like self-perception, perception of others. And yeah, just because Iris is considered plain, she knows she is the ugly stepsister. Just because she's plain and she's seen as like ugly, it doesn't mean that she's ugly in the inside, you know? The whole thing of don't judge a book by its cover, essentially. And then the same with Clara. Clara is gifted with this unnatural beauty, as it's often kind of described in this book. It's almost like a curse for her with this unnatural beauty. But yeah, does that make her like totally perfect and pure inside, you know? And as I already mentioned, we have the Master and Caspar, who are painters. Iris herself likes to dabble in painting. So there's that whole notion of beauty as presented in art, because it's a sort of false beauty almost. It's a mimicry of beauty. And then even the Master, he has a whole closet that's locked up with artwork of like what would be deemed ugliness, you know, of people who are deemed ugly, who are unworthy, kind of the low life of the town. But he keeps all this locked up in his pantry and whatnot, so people can't see it. And then there's also a whole other side story going on, because Clara's father is in the trade industry. He's like a merchant, and he trades in tulips. This novel's also kind of going into, I guess, what was like the Tulip Craze going on in Holland during this time period. And yeah, these were considered desirable, beautiful flowers. But yeah, through a series of events, some things kind of start happening, and kind of that fad starts disappearing. So then there's even that whole notion that Gregory Maguire is playing with even this whole thing of the side plot with involving beautiful flowers and whatnot. So yeah, this whole novel has something to do with beauty and ugliness in some fashion, in even the most mundane of things. So yeah, overall, I highly recommend this novel, especially if you have enjoyed Gregory Maguire in the past and you think you'll enjoy this. If you're looking for a unique, fresh take on Cinderella, that's, like I said, it's very, very different, and Gregory Maguire just does his own thing with it. And I did. I had a great time with this reread. I'm glad I decided to reread this book this year. It was just nice to get around to it again. And if anything, this book, I was like, man, I really want to read Wicked again. So yeah, I definitely recommend this. You guys, just let me know your thoughts. Have you read this book? Did you like it? Did you hate it? If you hated it, that's okay. Because like I said, this book isn't for everybody. There's definitely some things it's like, oh, you're either going to like it or you're going to hate it. So you guys, that is it for my thoughts and feelings on Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister by Gregory Maguire. The comments below, just let me know your thoughts and feelings about this book. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like this video, you may like these other videos. Bye guys.